The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. The Investment Fix podcast. Tune in today.
The Fold is brought to you by oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Nau mai, hoki mai, kia The Fold. E mihi nei, ko Duncan Greive, tōku ingoa. No guest this week. It's me doing another in my occasional series of monopods for reasons which I'll sort of detail at the end. But also just because there's been a few media stories around lately that I'd like to address, but most specifically, probably the biggest media story of the year, which is revelations that emerged last Friday, as I record this, that RNZ, a staffer at RNZ had been altering wire copy from the likes of Reuters and the BBC to give a distinctly pro-Kremlin slant to coverage of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And subsequently that's been expanded to, there's been references in stories about China, about Israel, about Cuba, to really kind of give a sense that there's just been a lot of issues kind of found here. And I think, to everyone's credit, the story was taken incredibly seriously. There was a brief moment when it was, when it might have been kind of not laughed off, but dismissed as a sort of a rogue story editor. But that it still, to this point, feels like the core of it, as it was a single person who clearly had a particular sort of matrix of views and has been periodically imposing that on stories they have published to the RNZ site. But it also is broader than that. There's questions it raises about the level of oversight of that copy and of just a broader readership of it, both within the RNZ audience and the RNZ staff. That these were, as soon as you saw them, it's just you immediately clock that there are very significant issues with what's been done here. So the fact it wasn't picked up, it does raise issues about process and about just total audience for this kind of thing. But the thing was, and this is obviously another big thread to it, is it wasn't picked up by some members of their audience. There were complaints made. These were essentially ignored by the looks of things. And that's pretty troubling because, even if the most cursory checking of what was alleged, it would have been immediately clear that this was an issue and not just a small one. Like I said, to RNZ's credit, it's taken it incredibly seriously. The board met yesterday, as I record, to essentially set terms of reference and appoint an external panel to investigate it. That panel, which includes Willie Akel and Linda Clark, is very senior, very serious people. And as my colleague Toby Manhai pointed out this morning, the terms of reference are very broad. And if I was to sort of posit a sense in which this might perversely become a positive for RNZ, it's that part of why this is so, one of the things that's been so strange about this is that RNZ is still essentially running two newsrooms. Like in 2023, it does not have an integrated newsroom. It runs essentially like an audio, basically a radio newsroom and a digital newsroom. That really is quite unconscionable. Even, that was quite typical in print newsrooms up until, kind of 2010, 2011 in some places. But that big integration piece typically happened back then. You can't really justify having these two different operations running sort of separate from one another. And so, if you want to talk about glass half full, because of the terms of reference, there is an opportunity for RNZ to do what it should have done a long time ago, which is re-engineer its news operation to be a single newsroom that creates a bunch of different types of output. But that is, that's a long way down the road yet. As of now, we're going to, over the course of the next month or so, see where this came from, see where the failures of oversight were, see to what extent it's personnel versus process. And it's a very awkward time for RNZ for this to be happening. They've just been given $25 million a year, essentially being told that they were the favoured child out of the failed merger of TVNZ and RNZ. It's a very significant sum in the context of RNZ's budget. It equates to a 50% increase in funding or thereabouts. And you can view this against this scandal in two ways. One of which is, well, this is what happens when you have an under-resourced company, that they don't have enough sub-editors or they can't create enough staffing to really protect the news product, and it was inevitable. There's another, which is actually, is it right to reward a company which has, as Mark Jennings pointed out in his very good coverage of it, has had declining ratings, both online and on radio, and a known kind of diversity problem in terms of some of its hires. So, I think that and I think both of those arguments, that there's some merit in the pair of them. So look, this is a massive story, a massive problem for RNZ. It is ongoing. It feels like every couple of days there are new stories that are discovered that have issues associated with them. It goes right to the heart of the sort of integrity of the news operation, and the timing sucks in another way, in that we are going through a level of trust crisis in media, which is really quite unprecedented. I went to a New Zealand First rally last week, and both the questions from the crowd and Winston Peters' response from the stage, made explicit reference to the Public Interest Journalism Fund, described it as a bribe for media to not criticise the government. That's absolutely untrue, but it is a way that a lot of people understand the media. I think there are other issues, some of them to a certain extent valid, that people have with the media at the moment, which have eroded trust. An event like this, it erodes trust in RNZ, it erodes trust in all of us, and it's a real problem. So that, on some level, is why it has had to be taken so seriously by the board and executive at RNZ, and why they're really, you can't get out of this without making a really substantive response. It just won't look like you're taking it seriously otherwise. So we'll watch this space. One more thing I wanted to make reference to. I was having a conversation with my colleague Anna Rafiti-Connell this morning, and she talked about the fact, and I think that I haven't seen this raised anywhere. I think it's a really important point, is that part of this is because RNZ, in a digital space, is trying to at least partially compete on volume, not necessarily with the New Zealand Herald and Stuff, which are obviously by far the largest volume players. I think that's essentially impossible, but certainly it's trying to create probably more than it can naturally with the level of staffing it has, even notwithstanding its wire copy relationships. And she sort of critiqued that in a way, based on, you really shouldn't try and make more than you can plausibly do with your stuff. Now, on some level, that's obvious, but I think there's really something in it, that there is a natural instinct to, when you're measuring your success by page views or by audience scale, to say, well, we don't have any choice. I think RNZ publishes around 40 stories a day, whereas the likes of Newsroom, the Spin-Off, Business Desk publish somewhere between 10 and 20 typically. We are all in that kind of subscale size. But I think tellingly, for any of those three that aren't competing with the really big volume players, there's a decision that's been made. Just ultimate size is not going to be our measure. The other thing that I think RNZ could do, and this could potentially flow out of this, some kind of merger of the newsrooms, is it in addition to trying to chase volume for volume's sake, it also can feel like it's trying to create news formats that most closely resemble the likes of Stuff and the Herald. When, I think that one of the most interesting and impressive text news innovations, online news innovations of the last 10 years has been the rise of Axios, which is very much around acknowledging that your audience is time poor and compressing the bare essentials of a story into as few words as possible into a really accessible format, which is extremely similar to what radio news has always done. And because RNZ has its amazing sort of in-depth team and has these long form or longer form interviews that happen in both its sort of primetime shows and its more magazine style shows that run between, there's actually a great mix of fast and slow or short and long that it could put together if it went about creating its digital product in a different way. So much as this is a very unfortunate and will be a really traumatizing time for RNZ as an organization, it does contain the opportunity to really rethink what it is and how it operates. So hopefully that is ultimately where this ends, because RNZ has a unique and very important place in New Zealand's news ecosystem, and it's really important to I think to the whole of the media that it comes out of this in better shape than it went in. I'm going to touch on another couple of stories very briefly, at least by my own verbose standards, before we go. Firstly, Sinead Boucher has recently stepped down or announced that she's stepping down as CEO of Stuff. I think that's a pretty extraordinary innings that she's had. If you look at when she assumed the chief executive role, it was just before Ardern took over as Prime Minister, and she leaves just after. So, and I think there is something in the comparison in that both of them sort of had to steer these very important institutions through times of acute stress, and really emphasize the sort of public good or the sort of the social contract element of government and Stuff as a media institution, respectively. There's some things that Boucher oversaw at Stuff that are fascinating, impactful on a world scale. I think the first one was the decision to leave Facebook. Turned out to be incredibly prescient. The fact of saying it publicly and saying to your audience, you cannot get your news on Facebook anymore. That was just brilliantly timed and conceived. It made her famous around the world in news circles. She's spoken, all over the world to explain the thinking there. And Stuff, to their credit, they haven't really seen an audience decline. They did manage to, by this one big public statement, transfer audience behavior from I'll see my news on Facebook to I'll go to Stuff to get my news. And honestly, we all should have done the same. Like, the amount of traffic that we get from Facebook has steadily declined, but we haven't had that big bang moment of saying, do not go there. Suffice it to say, if you read the spin-off and you're wondering why you don't see as much of it on Facebook, it's because Facebook is very deliberately decreasing the distribution of news on the platform for its own reasons. You'd got to, whether it's downloading the app and turning on push notifications, subscribe to a newsletter. This is true of all news organizations. That is the way that you have to consume it now. You just cannot rely on social media for distribution the way you once could. So that alone would make her tenure incredibly noteworthy. But there's also the purchase. She bought Stuff for $1. Turned out to be an incredible bargain, but at the time, it was one of the boldest and bravest moves we've seen in a very long time. There were a lot of people saying that if it's not this, then this whole company might go to the wall. Two really impressive things. They've also launched their paywalls. I still think that there's some kind of design issues there. If I'm honest, I think having 3 products, potentially more to come, versus turning stuff into a metered paywall product might prove to be wrong. But again, I could well be wrong myself. But the fact of getting them to that point is also a really impressive element. But like Ardern, likely very gassed by the moment, and I think this probably brings to ahead the last and element is I think that she's done succession very well. Laura Maxwell, ex-NZME, has taken over. I don't know Laura, I've never met her to my knowledge, but one of the things that she oversaw at NZME was One Roof, and I'm a huge admirer of that product. That's basically their digital real estate product. It is beautifully designed. They've smartly integrated it with the big traffic monster that is the Herald's homepage. They've created content that wraps around this core digital product, and it is, as far as a digital product that integrates with real estate listings and wraps content around that. It's just really well thought through and put together. And fundamentally, if you're going to be a media executive in this era, then your job is to essentially make a really brilliant and coherent digital product that you can wrap your business strategy around. And I think by recruiting Laura, who's overseen, I think probably, to my mind, NZME's most impressive digital product, it just looks like a really sharp piece of recruitment. So, applaud Sinead for all that she's accomplished, and really look forward to seeing what Laura will do with stuff going forward. Finally, just a quick note on the DIA online content review, which we talked about with Anna and Shanti a couple of weeks ago. I read yesterday Daniel Dunkley, who has been a long-time media reporter for Business Desk, brilliant, maybe usurped now by the Media Insider. At some point I'm going to get Shane Curry on this podcast, because that guy has come out of the blocks with an incredible energy and scope with his new Media Insider column. But Daniel is very good at giving a smart, well-reported sense of those kind of big beats of the media story in New Zealand. And he published a piece recently that looked into the media industry's misgivings around this DIA document, this discussion document that may well ultimately become law, that will introduce basically a level playing field across all digital media. And I think, the more I've kind of read it and sort of sat with it, the more I think there is something in the concerns of the big media bosses about news media content being treated with a harm lens and being put into the same bucket as social media. And obviously we're at the start of a consultation process. If I had to bet, I would be I'd be fairly confident that there will be, that the existing process around the Media Council and BSA will be sort of protected within this new mega ministry or sort of mega regulator, but it does need to happen, because the sort of harm-centric vision of how content regulation will evolve, when applied to media, it really can have a chilling effect. And there is a world where a whole lot of very legitimate, actually quite important debate is impacted negatively by this regulator, which obviously has a pretty profound impact on us as a society and democracy. So I recommend seeking out Daniel's piece there, and just thinking hard about that regulation piece. That there's a lot, I think, that's very positive about the idea of regulating all online media content with a much more, just trying to bring a level of fairness into the way that we are regulated. But news, it is its own animal, and it needs to be protected, I think. Anyway, that is a monopod from me. I'd just like to say I'm about to go away for 6 weeks. A holiday that's directly connected to my resignation earlier this year. I've recorded episodes to run through from now till the start of July, and I think they're great. They will necessarily not be as timely as if there's some big media story breaks, I will not be around to address it. Potentially one of my colleagues will jump in, but I thank you for listening to The Fold and bearing with me while I am a long way from this microphone, and I'll be back. I'll be here every week, but also back in August to bring a fresh and hopefully refreshed tone and presence to this microphone. Thanks very much for listening. That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to oOh!media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today. The Spin-off Podcast Network.